Political fever has gripped the stock markets as well, with investors looking for cues from the upcoming election results in 5 states, which will be announced on the 11th of December. So why are these election results so important for the markets, even though they are essentially state elections, which means 5 new state governments will be voted in? What is the strategy to adopt ahead of this politically turbulent phase? To talk on this, I have 3 market experts with me today. I'm joined by Jonathan Schiessl, a fund manager at Ashburton. He is speaking to us from London today. Ajay Bagga, executive chairman of OPC Asset Solutions, is with us here in the studios. And we're also joined by Ajay Srivastava, MD of Dimensions Consulting. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us. The aim is just to understand how markets are looking at these elections, and I'll start with Ajay Bagga, who's with us here in the studio. Is it taken for granted this time round, as it is in most of the last few elections, that markets are hoping for a BJP win in most of these 5 states?
Well, markets want continuity and stability, and also they would like a consolidated government, a majority government instead of a hodgepodge coalition. I think those are the factors. More on continuity, whether BJP or Congress or a formation, it has to be a strong government, and a little bit of stability is what...
You know, I hear this all of the time, that markets want continuity, but the point of elections is where people get a chance to choose in a government again, and it's not always going to be the same government. Yeah. Otherwise, elections would not be required anymore. And
that's the beauty of democracy, that people really get a choice, and especially if you look at Rajasthan, they are alternating every year. Since 1998, it's like a Republican-Democrat kind of a two-cornered contest. So that is good, but I think what also the markets do realize that basically both political formations have pretty similar kind of policies. We don't really expect very differential policies, but what markets do like is something which is in the center of the political spectrum. So that's where, if you see across the last 6 elections, when have the markets fallen? One was 1998 because of the Asian financial crisis, and second was 1996 because there was a coalition government, a Democratic Front government. Same in 1989 with the VP Singh government, the markets didn't perform.
2004, the day the results were announced, there was a huge crack.
Yeah, but if you see within a few months, the markets did well. Yeah. So before and after, because before it was India shining, so the expectation was that BJP or the NDA continues, and after a few months we saw the markets coming back.
Ajay Srivastava, do you agree with that? Because the general perception seems to be that the markets and market participants like a BJP government in power. What could be the reasons for that, and is that a correct perception?
I don't think so at all. I don't think so at all. I think it's very clear to the investment public and to the investors that there is much more to the market than just the political parties and their agenda. People have to get to reality. Reality check is what? Investor community is the last on the politician's food chain. Do you hear any of the politicians talking about in this election or any elections about economic story, the growth, the reforms? They're talking about loan waiver. They're talking about construction of statues, temples, and all kind of stuff. It has no impact. We are incidental to the game of chess called politics. It doesn't matter which party comes to power. The price of oil, the RBI's interest rate policy, the basic world economy is what's going to dictate our markets, what's an appetite for emerging market. Yes, to some extent, a stable polity is required in any system altogether. Not to say that coalition is not a stable polity by any standard. In fact, what's happened here, and the lesson to be learned here is that when you have coalitions, the governments are far more responsible before they take decisions because their very survival is at stake. And therefore, you have much more responsible economic policy making than perhaps in a situation where one party holds absolute majority. It's not work for India. It's not work for anybody in the world. America had the best growth when you had the Republicans in the Congress and the Senate, and you had the Democrat president. I don't think it matters. I think what matters is most is how global scenarios work out, what happens to the people in power? And number three is, what happens to institutions around us? You know, what happened to RBI, which fixes interest rates? Now, you can have the most stable government and the worst decision called demonetization being signed up by the RBI. So where does it leave a strong majority in government versus a poor economic policy? It's the same thing. At the end of the day, the RBI, the CAG, the IRDA, the SEBI, the government all make some system or ecosystem where you come and perform and then you get the share price going. So I don't think that this election is going to make any difference to us or to the investment community. You are not even mentioned in the manifesto. So I think to say that you are important for them, I think it's
I think it's the other way around. I don't think anyone's ever claiming that investors and stock market investors, barely 1 or 2% of this population are important for any government or any political party. They would be doomed if they even talked about stock market investors in their manifestos. It's the reverse. Does it matter to investors who's in power? And if not, why do markets respond in this fashion to election results before elections? Are you saying today, Ajay Srivastava, that the markets don't care about what happens on 11 December?
I don't think so. I'm genuinely speaking. See, markets do react because you take, like speculators, you take positions vis-a-vis a marketer every day. So in some cases, like an event, you take a larger positions and the market starts to adjust to larger positions. In a market like today, like you saw the market today, you won't take any major positions. But heading into elections, you expect something to change and therefore you take larger positions. And when the results come either pro or against your positions, you try to adjust your market standing at that point of time. That is why you see 1 or 2 days positioning change, dramatic volumes, dramatic movement, dramatic trading, and then you go back to the stable sort of system. So I don't think it makes a long-term difference at all. It makes a short-term difference because you trade on these results, you kind of build a position on results, and that's the nature of the speculation beast, that you need to trade for big events. And election is a big event to some extent, but it's not a material event for even a 1 month forward stock market.
Okay, interesting perspective. Let me get Jonathan into this discussion, and I'll have to start with that basic question. Jonathan, are you looking at the election results? What do you expect to happen, and how crucial would they be for how an international investing community looks at India?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we do look, but I think I might echo the previous comments. It's really very short term and more of an impact on sentiment than hard facts on the ground as such. So obviously, from our perspective, the state elections might give an indication of what's going to happen next year, but we wouldn't put too much weight onto that. But clearly, having if you just look at an example of a government which doesn't have a majority, which it has a weak and unstable coalition partner, you just have to look at the UK and the political chaos that we're currently going through. So I think some sort of reasonably strong government in the centre is important. But of course, I would agree that what stripe it is not our concern, as long as we see consistent policy making, and actually those are the factors we tend to look at.
Okay, in the Indian context, this coalition versus stable government, because it's an interesting debate that Ajay Srivastava has kicked off. Let's look at the last two governments preceding this one, the UPA 1 and the UPA 2. Both of them were coalition governments. And then you've had a government, very stable, brute majority in the Lok Sabha, in charge for the last 4.5 odd years. Has there been a major difference in policies which would then impact stock markets and investors in these two governments, Jonathan?
I think clearly this government in place now came in with a mandate which I think surprised the market. You could look back over the last 4 years and look at some events, some reforms that have certainly been introduced that have been a long time in the tooth and talked about and actually put through. I guess it's too early to say whether those reforms have had a positive or a negative effect, because if you look at GST, obviously we're only just over a year into it, and we're still going. It's still, sort of, it's not quite bedded in yet. So I think from our perspective, a stable government, a strong government that can take difficult decisions, is more preferable to a coalition government which could be hijacked by coalition partners, and therefore Quite frankly, some decisions aren't necessarily in the national interest as opposed to a regional or a state-specific interest. So from our perspective, a government in the centre which can actually, conduct policy in a reasonably efficient manner is clearly very important.
Okay, let me come to what I think everyone is talking about right now. Among themselves, it's the common topic of discussion. And I'll start with Ajay Bagga. What are you thinking about what's going to happen in this election? I think when people meet each other nowadays, the first thing is, kya lagta hai, kya hone wala hai?
Yeah, I mean, it's moved from cricket betting to betting on the election outcomes. And it's a very interesting scorekeeping that's going on. Overall, Tamanna, 2 or 3 caveats I would put in. One, the opinion pollsters get it wrong more than they get it right. So
they're playing it safe this time round.
Yes.
If you look at it on an average, everyone's playing it pretty much, pretty safe.
Maybe it's too close to call then, because there's a lot of moderation that goes in. One is the sample size, and then they actually sit and moderate, because every sample can have some kind of error. Second is, there seems to be a pretty big consensus that Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh are very close to call. Telangana goes to the incumbent. Mizoram, it'll be very close. And Rajasthan is going Congress. That seems to be the consensus. Of course, each party will have a different perspective. I think the very big thing that will come out is 679 assembly elections, assembly seats, 66 Lok Sabha seats are represented by this. So that's 13% of the electorate of India, which is voting. That's why everybody is calling it as a semi-final. But things can change in 4 months, 5 months, but it will give a good trend at least on what is happening on the ground. How are people taking the policies of the last 4 years? So it will be like a report card to that extent.
You agree, Mr. Srivastava, that these election results at least give us enough data in a sense to be able to look at what could happen in 2019? That's a point Jonathan also made, and which is why there seems to be so much interest in what these elections will show you.
See, we believe that these elections will give some pointers. Of course, it will give some pointers, but I'm not sure you can extrapolate on the national platform, because the issues will be very different when Lok Sabha elections get fought, when this gets fought. Economic situation could be very different than what it is today, what it could be in the month of May, etc. You've seen the recent changes being requested from RBI on lots of things. Those might change the dynamics. Yes, good pointer, perhaps yes, but will it definitely give the trend? I doubt it very much, because the national politics play is very different. There are leadership issues, there are coalition issues, etc. And I think you will have a lot of plays in Northeast, South will come into play. So I'm not sure whether, see, one clear pointer is obvious to everybody, is that the ruling party will lose some votes in this election. I think that's a given to everybody, that they will lose. Now, what's the magnitude of loss? We don't know the answer to that one. But whether that magnitude of loss can be translated to national, I very much doubt that. I think national politics will play out very differently. It may energize a few people, but that it may energize the ruling party as well to come and defend itself. I doubt it that it will give you a very clear point as to what's going to happen in national elections. One thing is for sure, that the ruling party is going to get less votes. I think that's a trend which is given. Now that will go on to national play, whether it goes to make them below majority. I think that's really the question people are asking is, will we have a government which none of the political parties will have a majority next year? And that looks to be the most likely scenario. So,
I'm just going to ask you a follow-up on that, Mr. Srivastava, because one thing is pretty clear, that there will be an alliance of parties and the Congress party will be in that alliance. What kind of position it will have in that alliance, I think, will also be incumbent on the 11th December results. If they do better, maybe they'll be stronger in position in this Mahagathbandhan. It will be them versus the BJP, pretty much BJP versus all. Now, in a situation like that, do you think how the BJP performs in these elections will play a major role? And do you see that then as a threat, that if you have this Gathbandhan in power by some permutation and combination, do you see that as any potential threat?
Of course it is. See, let's put the scenario forward. that what are people doing? Really speaking, we are talking of the fence-sitters and political parties who want to jump, or the political parties who are willing to see where the trend is going. Let's understand, political parties want to be in power. So they need to figure it out at the end of this elections, that is there a greater chance that Congress coalition is going to get into the majority in the parliament along with all the coalition partners? Then you'll find a lot of fence-sitters moving to this side. And that's the danger for the ruling party, is that today they are comfortably sitting with people not willing to move out of their fold. Now, if this elections goes the wrong way, those people get emboldened to move out into the party, making a dramatic shift in their political fortune. And I think that's the danger here. The danger is the fence-sitters moving out from the ruling party in case these elections go badly for the ruling party.
Okay. Jonathan, I'm going to ask you how you plan, or how investors should plan for what will clearly be a turbulent phase politically. Long-term impacts in the stock market may not be that large, but in the short term, there will definitely be movements which would correspond with what happens in these elections in 2019. What should the strategy be here?
Yeah, I think clearly the elections are but one element to consider, an important element, but obviously, as one of as discussed previously, there are lots of factors at play which are influencing markets, be it oil, be it global interest rates, be it rising cost of capital globally, and all these factors and where we are in the cycle, quite frankly. So I think from our perspective, we are a little bit cautious globally. We're a little bit cautious about the premium India is currently enjoying versus other emerging markets. And we think probably the market, is under a little bit of pressure for the time being, and we can't see a great deal of upside, in the short term. I think the elections, though, is a factor we do consider, but it's certainly not the most important one. It's just one of many factors. So specifically, we're not altering our portfolios on the basis of where we think or might not think the elections will go, because we have no edge on that. But obviously, what we try and do is just think of a bigger picture and try and combine all the factors that are at play.
From the market's perspective, and let me come back to Ajay Srivastava, I wanted to ask you about what you think will happen. And in the markets, is there a perception that this government has been good for the markets or not? What is the sort of mental rating market experts or market participants have on this government's performance?
That's a risky question to answer, but let's try to attempt and say that it's been a mixed bag. I think it had lots of things in its favor. One bad decision, a bad demonetization, a little bit of sloppy implementation, GST, costed them a pretty hefty package in terms of what's happened to the economy today. And I think it delayed the issues with the banks, so that's got a big issue around it. So, the good parts were that, yes, government spending went up, the national roads things went up, and things start to fall in place. The bad things were the demonetization, the GST, and the worst part has been the exports. I think if you look at one of the biggest weaknesses of this government, perhaps economic policy, has been the very, very stagnant exports, which we have not even crossed the level which we were 5 years back in the last 4 years. I think that's been the one big. The strong point perhaps is that there's been a lot of confidence, a lot of FDI came into the country, FPIs were very, very buoyant and bringing the money into the country. So you had a large inflow of foreign money and a lot of, what is called, we captured the mind of the large investment community abroad, and therefore there was definitely, India had a big leg up in terms of getting investment. So I think very strong positives on investment side, negatives on what happened in the exports, negatives on the MSME side. So it's a mixed bag. On an overall, I would say a little disappointing, because we thought a majority government could have done a lot more than what happened. But how one decision can change a destiny, and I think that is a bad decision which is affecting us today. So it's a mixed bag, some good, some bad. Could have been a lot better, as what we can see.
Let's be honest, Ajay Srivastava makes an interesting point when he says that's a risky question. All of 2013, I was speaking to people who trade in markets on record and off record, and everyone was very excited, gung-ho. Ajay, you and me have spoken so many times that BJP will come and make a big decision. Please, let's go back to the days of, what we called policy paralysis. And today, what are we saying after 4 years?
No, I think the 2014 election was won on a lot of hope, a lot of promise, a lot of expectations. Those expectations have not come through. and on record, no corporate will come here to your studios and say that they are unhappy.
It's my job to ask.
Yeah, their businesses they have to run. But overall, if you see, I think a few areas stand out. What Ajay already mentioned, demonetization was not thought through. GST implementation has taken time. Refunds have got stuck. We've had working capital issues. SMEs are facing a lot of problems. Agrarian crisis is there, and employment issues. And I don't think anything can change Tamanna. So I come back to my thesis that this is the semi-final. Why did I say? No matter what course correction you do, it's too late now. It's too late. Only two things will happen which will change this. One, you will do something on the Ram Mandir, try to polarize. Second, there could be a surgical strike on Pakistan. These are the two big brahmastres that administrators always have, to polarize voters into voting one way. Otherwise, I would say this will give a very good trend analysis, this elections. Again, how much it changes our lives, it doesn't, because Indian economy works in spite the policymakers, not because of. China is the one which is really doing. Today, China, I just read while coming here that they have said any bond holders, foreign bond holders don't need to pay onshore tax on interest. Now, things like that. Here we have a finance secretary who says stock markets, the money gets made very easily. And since then, we have not made money. This market has only been good.
Are we still crying about long-term capital gains tax?
Lot of things. Lot of things go into, when you have such a nascent market where only 4% people are really investing, you have to get capital into the country. We have seen this market, we have seen the 1984 opportunity that Rajiv Gandhi missed with such a huge mandate. We saw in 1984, then we saw 94. When FIIs first came in, we had to explain this is India, this is what they would tentatively come in. By 2000, the thing was, I need $250 million, $500 million exposures, show me bigger stuff. 2013, nothing is moving. I know the India story, I'll come back later. Last 3-4 years, we saw the FIIs coming back strongly. So that is one big fear. If you have a hodgepodge government with policies not clear, that makes. So I would say overall they've done a lot, but the circumstances were difficult and it needed a far bigger administrative performance. Then that came in, and right now it is too late to change that. So I don't know what the common man thinks. I am, the 1%, so I'm a totally wrong person to tell you the trends. But I think we will know with these elections a bit at least what the common person is thinking.
Ajay Srivastava, I didn't ask you the question that I asked Mr. Bagga, which is, would you like to tell me what you think is going to happen on 11 December? And I think I should not either spare you that chance to answer or give you the opportunity. Do tell me.
Okay, I think definitely, as I said, there will be a substantial reduction in votes for the ruling party. I think that's a given by and large. Which state will go where? I'm not a great prognostic. I can't do that much of this thing, but I know certainly that 1 or 2 states will fall out of the ruling party's lap at this point of time. So I think that's a limited thing. Bottom line is that votes will fall. 1 state at least, if not 2, will go out of the ruling party's lap. And I think we will move on to the next stage of the elections. And I think, well, what lesson we can take from here, as I keep saying again and again, not too much, because this is not going to be replayed on the national level. National game will be very differently played. What may happen from now till May, lots can happen. So let's not say that this will be directly extrapolated, but yes, it will lead a lot of people to start believing that there is a way for them to win elections and beat the ruling party. I think that confidence is what will change in these elections of the opposition. Can they not, get around the ruling party? That confidence will come from these elections, and that could dictate the future of perhaps India for next 5 years.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ajay Bagga, Ajay Srivastava, and of course, Jonathan, for joining us today. Markets are watching elections very closely, and perhaps beyond a point, it won't matter to what makes investors decide and makes that final decision. But in the short term, definitely, it is the biggest event that markets are watching as well.